Monsieur Anber.
Monsieur Cassava, ça va bien, mon ami?
I'm doing very well, and thank you everyone for tuning in to another edition of Calling Russ Anber. And as you can see, we have a special guest, and we'll get to it right away. Russ, we don't have much time for introductions. There's a lot of topics, a lot of stuff to get to, and we have the privilege of being joined by, go ahead, Mr. Anber.
We'll put this properly because I didn't want you to screw up the His Eminence, Bruce Trampler.
Really?
His Eminence, yeah. Because when you've been in this game as long as he has, and when you've done all the things that he has in boxing, you earn a certain title. And that title of being eminence allows him to verbally abuse other people in the boxing business. So, and they take it with a grin and they accept it. So there you go.
Well, that's Mr. Bruce Trampler, a Hall of Famer. So it's good we have a Hall of Famer on the show for this evening. How you doing, Bruce?
I'm doing great, Matt. Hi, Russ.
Good evening, Bruce. How are you?
Now, I know that, Bruce, you probably were coerced by Russ and harassed to do the podcast, because I know we're trying to get people at the top rank offices for a little while here. And I guess you finally accepted, and we would definitely appreciate that.
It was a money transfer from Russ. I took my money in US dollars, not francs. And he met my price, and here we are.
There we go.
And Russ, did you tell Bruce that usually the price for podcast guests is In-N-Out Burger?
or the fast food of their choice. Yes, indeed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And Bruce, we wanted to have you on for a ton of topics here, and we love to discuss and go through the history of boxing, and having somebody who's been in the game as long as you have and Russ has, it's a great, to have that conversation. But we'll get to a little bit more in a second. But the timing of this, as we record this here on Thursday night, July 8th, is a bit coincidental that it happens that there's a huge news involving Top Rank and the boxing world that happened today with the postponement of Tyson Fury and the Deontay Wilder fight. My question is, you must have dealt with these big fights post-moment in the past. Where does this one rank right now in terms of what you know, and how did you find out about the news?
Well, I still haven't been told officially. The fighters were being tested, several fighters on the card, and we're gonna know from ESPN and from my bosses tomorrow. And I've just heard like everybody else. I've read things, I've heard things, and I don't mean to be vague about it, but I really don't know much more than that right now.
And how does the process go from an organization? Like, how many are you at Top Rank right now, let's say on a day-to-day basis, or how many people in Top Rank work on putting an event like this together?
We've got over 50 people working at Top Rank in all different capacities. Some are in social media, some are in the matchmaking department, some are administrative stuff. So we've got a lot of people involved in this and other shows. We're exclusive to ESPN. It's a great partnership, a great relationship. And when something like this happens, it affects not only hundreds of people, but thousands of people. And so we're just going to try and piece things together and do the best we can. These things do happen, and we'll just go forward, figure it out, and make the best of it.
Usually, Bruce, in the past, we'd be accustomed to getting my fighter got cut. Like that was the worst thing. You get called, the fighter got cut in sparring. After all these years in the business, who'd be thinking now, a year into this, that I know we've seemed to gotten used to it, but we're out because of a COVID test.
Well, most recently, of course, was the Triller show where Teofimo tested positive.
Right.
And we've had on the our year in the bubble at MGM, we had a number of bouts canceled, either due to COVID illness by a fighter, or by his cornermen. So we've been living with this really since March of last year, and we're no strangers to it. We've had to postpone fights, reschedule them, as have other promoters. So it's just the era that we're living in.
Is it something that you expect to be, is it more of an inconvenience, I should say, right now, that just has to find a new date and find a new venue, or and everything just kind of goes and it's not a super long postponement? Or do you think that there could be more risk to this, that the fight really prolonging into the next year and haggles and problematics happening?
Well, we don't know yet. We don't have enough information. Clearly, for those involved in the event, they're losing paydays, purses. The cornermen are losing out. The promoter is losing a big investment in travel and in advertising, things like that. So it's terrible for everybody. But again, we've been through it before, and we'll probably, unfortunately, go through it again. But a lot of people are affected, not the least of which are the fighters on the card who've been training, and not the least which is the promoter who's laid out a lot of money so far.
But what about when this fight does indeed happen, the third fight, the trilogy? We knew Fury Joshua would probably be one of the biggest fights that the heavyweight division has had post Mike Tyson. Now, people still expect the trilogy to be big, but from what you were doing on the inside and what the feelings of the pay-per-view numbers and stuff like that, even though I know most of it is anticipation, but the hype and the marketing aspect of it, how big do you think this heavyweight title fight will be once it actually does occur?
Are you talking Wilder Fury 3?
Yeah,
or
the third Wild fight, like whatever the date does indeed happen.
Yeah, I can tell you it was trending very, very well. The ticket sales, surprisingly, for this time of the year in a sweltering hot Las Vegas, the advance sales were tremendous. The early word on pay-per-view subscriptions was way ahead of where we expected it would be. So it was doing very, very well. And when it's rescheduled, we hope we reach the same targets.
Right. Okay, well, then I guess let's go back to last weekend, Bruce. And how has the landscape changed with Lomachenko's win, or should I say 2 weekends ago now? How has the landscape in that division changed for Loma now?
I think it's, he had such an impressive win. His first fight back after the close decision, the disputed decision, lost to Teofimo. And I think the overall reaction among fans and among those in the business is that Lomachenko's back. He's as good as ever. And he's getting a lot of support for whatever he decides to do next, whatever fight he takes. He's got a big following, and he certainly deserves it.
And before we get to all of these fights for us and Loma, maybe also for the people at home who are not entirely sure, Bruce, can you explain how you got started with Top Rank or in boxing, and what your role is right now in the day-to-day operations?
Well, with Top Rank, I started in November of 1980. You remember that year, Matt, I'm sure.
Well, in the history books, I'm actually, I do enjoy quite a bit of history.
Yeah.
I know USA beat Russia in the Olympics in 1980, I believe.
We didn't go to, we didn't go to 1980, the US, I mean. But anyway, that's when I started with Top Rank. I went full-time in March of the 1981. At the time, Bob Arum had just created the ESPN Top Rank Boxing Series. So Teddy Brenner, the legendary Hall of Fame matchmaker, under whom I'd worked at Madison Square Garden when Teddy and I were both there, he brought me on board to help out with the weekly shows on ESPN. That's where it started.
And Bruce, was your livelihood in boxing always from the matchmaking perspective? Because I know I've seen pictures of you working corners of fighters, so you definitely worked with fighters.
Yeah, I turned pro in boxing in June of 1971. When I got out of college, I was hired by the great trainer Angelo Dundee to be his apprentice, his student, his assistant, and his brother Chris, the also legendary Hall of Fame promoter, So I learned from both of them at the gym with Angelo, working with fighters, and in the office with Chris Dundee, learning promotion, doing press releases, selling tickets, advertising. But I'd also done 3 years before that in college, where I was, I was a college student at Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, working with fighters then. I managed Buster Douglas's father, Bill Douglas, who was a real hard punching middleweight, a rated middleweight contender. And when I went down to Miami Beach in June of '71 and started working with Angelo, it was quite a finishing school for a young man.
And the game is different now from when you started, isn't it?
I don't, yeah, you could say that.
Well, the thing we talk about a lot of times, me and Russ, throughout these shows, Bruce, is that there's been an evolution in some sense where it's positive, but also the fact is that we miss you were working in boxing when boxing was the main sport in many ways. It wasn't as niche as it is now, where there's followings and you can get some of the stars to make big money, but you're not going to get the press to care as much as they will, like for a Fury Wilder fight on a day-to-day basis, like it was in the 70s and 80s. So isn't that also one of the biggest differences, you would say, throughout your years in boxing, showing how much the sport has become more niche, if you will, compared to the 70s and 80s?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point you made. But boxing has always been kind of cyclical. After Marciano retired, you had Floyd Patterson became a heavyweight champ, but he never really caught on. He was a great guy, wonderful person, pretty good fighter. But it wasn't until, many years later when Sonny Liston knocked him out a couple times. And then Liston, of course, fought Clay, who became Ali. And Ali rejuvenated the sport. But at that time, you couldn't, nobody in the newspapers really cared about the rest of boxing. You couldn't get a story in the paper if it wasn't about Muhammad Ali and the heavyweight title. Eventually, we hit a very high cycle, not only with heavyweights like Mike Tyson, but also with the lighter weights, the Alexis Arguellos, the Julio Cesar Chavez's, the Pernell Whitakers, and then we came into the 80s with the four kings, Hagler, Leonard, Duran, and Hearns, and that was really a big time in boxing. And right now, we've had Oscar De La Hoya, we've had Floyd Mayweather, we've had a lot of big names in the last generation, we'll call it. But the heavyweight championship is always the big prize. That's what people gravitate toward. And, whether it's Klitschko, whether it's Joshua, whether it's Fury, that gets most of the attention.
Right. Bruce, is there something to say that, like when we had the four kings, when they came, when Leonard, Durant, when that happened, when was the last time the welterweight or middleweight division was that hot? Would you have to go back as far as the days of Robinson, when you paid him, Robinson and Graziano and Zale, to say that those divisions were popping as much as the heavyweight division was? Or was there another time when the world paid attention to those weight classes?
Well, there was a very special smaller fighter named Manny Pacquiao, who's got a big fight coming up this summer. And Manny transcended several weight classes. He ended up as a welterweight, but he fought in several lower divisions on his way up. And Manny always captured the public interest, and not only among American fans but internationally. So, and Floyd covered several weight classes. Chavez Sr. did. Roberto Duran certainly did. So the smaller weight classes have been very well represented.
Yeah, and Russ, go ahead. I was going to say, Bruce, some of the talent the Top Rank has in Pacquiao was another name that they were able to build up, and eventually some stayed, some moved on. It happens, but how much pride do you guys take at Top Rank, and you personally, of recruiting these talents? Because it's a worldwide sport. There's a ton of fighters every day, hundreds to thousands of fighters who are looking for contracts, they're looking to get a promotional deal. Where does it come from, basically watching tape or coming up with decisions to, this is the guy we feel like we should invest in, and kind of that talent to recruit these fighters?
You never know where you're going to find talent. And I apologize, the lights went out here. But
one of those days.
Yeah, I'd have to wave my arms to get it going up again. But anyway, you never know where you're going to find talent. It could be the surprise reemergence of the great George Foreman, who captured the interests of millions when he came back, and eventually, on his third shot, he won the heavyweight title, knocking out Michael Moore. Or it could be, as Freddie Roach often said, just one day this little Filipino southpaw walked up the back steps of his gym, and it was Manny Pacquiao. Freddie didn't know him from Adam, and he caught him on the mitts that day. He said, "Holy mackerel, this guy's got something." It just happens. Of course, we scout the amateur ranks, and we try to find the best amateur fighters, but that doesn't always translate to the best professional fighters, because the amateurs is really a different sport, and different rules, different everything, different weight classes. So you don't know that a good amateur is going to become a good pro. And on the other hand, you'll get some good pros who weren't particularly outstanding as amateurs.
Bruce, how much has it changed the game with that? Now we're seeing an emergence of so many great fighters from the Eastern Bloc that have emerged as dominating champions, whether it's Usyk, Lomachenko, Golovkin, Klitschko, all these guys who pre-1990 would never have turned pro, or 89, I should say, would never have turned pro anyways, because they weren't allowed to. They were under the former Soviet bloc. How much has that changed boxing? How much more global has it made it? And what difference would it have made in the sport if they would have been allowed to turn pro in the previous years?
Well, the dirty little secret was always that the Eastern Bloc fighters really were professionals. They were paid amateurs. They were, subsidized by the various governments. And so they had tremendous advantages over American kids who were pure amateurs. And, but they're very well schooled over there. I give a lot of credit to the European bloc fighters, Eastern European. They're really good. We've seen Golovkin, we've seen Klitschko, we've seen so many, Lomachenko, and there's a lot more that, I don't have time to name right now, but they've won titles, they've represented very well, and they have talent. Whereas the American kids, I hate to say it, but I see a decline in the American fighters, because they've got other outlets now. They can play football, basketball, make a lot of money. They can play baseball. They can play soccer. A lot of things they can do. And, over the years, the American gyms have dried up, the gymnasiums. It's not like it used to be, where you could go into any major city and have your choice of gymnasiums, your choice of veteran experienced trainers. We just don't have that anymore.
I think, though, that's actually happening. I think one of the reasons that's happening is because the same thing is happening at the grassroots level in amateur boxing. The amateur program is not as strong as it used to be. I mean, you should remember this, being from Ohio, when Mr. Cummings used to put on the Ohio State Fair, and that was the biggest amateur boxing tournament maybe in the world, but certainly in the Western world, where there were there were 800 entries in the open class. There were 3 rings. Tyson fought there. Every great American fighter fought there, and the depth in the division was so great, and that doesn't exist anymore. So it's difficult to have great pros emerging when you don't have great amateurs happening.
You're right. I knew Bill Cummings very, very well. A great man, and but it wasn't just Columbus, Ohio, to take that state for as an example, has so many big cities. You wouldn't think so, but you got Cincinnati, Toledo, Columbus, Akron, Youngstown, Dayton, Cleveland. Yeah, but it wasn't just Ohio. It was Michigan. It was Illinois had a huge amateur program in Chicago. St. Louis did. And there was the New York Golden Gloves used to sell out Madison Square Garden, the big arena. Then it became downstairs in the theater, and now they just put them in high schools and church gyms, and it's just not what it used to be, the amateur program. It's very unfortunate. It's still alive in California, which is why you still get a lot of good fighters out of California, and it's still alive in Texas, but nothing near what it was 10, 15 years ago. I'm not talking the old days, the good old days. I'm talking the very recent past.
Right.
Right.
And,
So
and when you think about somebody like the Daily News that was sponsoring the Golden Gloves, and
Right.
readers were reading about the Golden Gloves, and when it meant something to be a Golden Glove champion in New York, that's almost not there anymore. And as a result, as it goes forward into the pros, you're not having as many pros coming out of that program and adding depth to that division. And that's why I think we're seeing so many, if you will, foreign fighters now having success in the pro game. The depth is just not there like it used to be in America.
You're absolutely right. And it goes in cycles. The Eastern Europeans will eventually discover, obviously, football, soccer is huge in Europe, and rightfully so. But they'll eventually discover baseball. They have a lot of basketball already. Maybe they'll start playing American football. Who knows? And in our country, kids tend to play other sports, and boxing is not their calling. No, it's not their goal. You can idolize Mike Tyson and you can idolize George Foreman, but if you're a big kid, you're going to want to play football or basketball rather than go through the rigors and ordeals of boxing.
Well, and Russ, because of the fact you talked about how you do have still American fighters, and Kelly Pavlik was a great example of somebody at Top Rank was able to develop into a star. We still see several others, whether it was Floyd Mayweather, we have Shakur Stevenson now with Top Rank, and there's others. But the process of recruiting fighters internationally as well now, how does it work, Bruce, for Top Rank to make a decision of the process of this is a fighter we have our eye on and we want to recruit them and give them a contract? Because it's not that everybody, of course, are going to be selective in who you choose. So how does that process come about?
Well, the scouting process, some fights we're able to attend in person and put eyes on the young kids. Some you can pretty much evaluate everybody on video today on YouTube. You can get tapes of fighters if you might have interest, and that shows you the skill set. It shows you how a kid works in the ring, how he moves, how he punches. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, you want to meet them in person and ascertain, does this kid really want to be a fighter, or is he just a good boxer who's content to score points and win amateur tournaments? They all want to make money, understandably, but to make money in the pro game, you have to also be an entertainer. You have to put on a good show, and some coaches don't seem to grasp that. Some fighters don't seem to. They think if they win fights on points, that's good enough, and it's not. Mm-hmm. You gotta be a Golovkin. You gotta be a Canelo Alvarez. You gotta be a Mike Tyson. You gotta beat guys and entertain the fans and make them tune into television or buy a ticket to a fight. So the amateur game today is based solely on winning a fight. You don't have to punch to the body. You don't have to knock anyone out. Just get your hand raised at the end and get your medal. And they're content with that. And they think that translates into big bucks in the professional ranks. But it really doesn't.
Bruce, is it fair to say that when you look at the top talent that's in boxing today, like the guys you mentioned, whether it's the Lomachenkos or whether it's the Usyks or the Canelos of the world, if you look at them talent-wise, is it fair to say that these guys would have been great and would have been strong in any era in boxing? The difference being that there isn't the depth per division today that there isn't as many fighters now at the world-class level hanging in that top 10 as there was?
It's a very good point, and you're right. The depth of each weight class is very much watered down, and one reason for that is that there's less fighters today, of course. Right. Another reason is that there's 4 organizations. So between the WBO, the WBC, the IBF, and the WBA, if you made one of those guys the real world champion, the other 3 would be contenders.
That's
they'd be fighting for a shot at the title, but it's so watered down and diluted now that each organization, and they're not there for your health; they're there for their own health. They want to charge sanction fees, and they're beneficial if you can advertise a fight as a world title fight per whatever organization. That's fine. But the truth is, because there's 4 guys holding titles, 4 title holders, world title holders, and in WBA's case, multiple title holders in each of their weight classes, these guys would all be contenders. One guy would be champ, which is the era I was raised in, and the other guys would be fighting for a shot to win the title. Now a guy wins one organization's title and he's content to sit on it and fight the watered down list of challengers.
So guys, isn't that, sorry, Russ, just for a second. So isn't that one of the credits that Top Rank maybe should have of the last few years? Just a few weeks ago, you had Josh Taylor against Jose Ramirez for all the belts at 140, and you had Terrence Crawford be the undisputed champion at 140 a few years ago as well. So it's even probably less likely that we see these fights now going forward, but that's credit to your organization, I would think, and the fighters being able to at least try to get 4 belts, because it's not something we see much of anymore.
Well, you're partially right, and I appreciate the credit you're giving us, but let's look back at the 4 kings in the mid-1980s. Why did Top Rank do Hagler, Leonard, Duran, and Hearns? They fought each other a total of 9 times. We didn't do Hearns and Duran, but I think we did the 8 other fights. But why did we do them? Because we could. See, today, each of those guys would have his own promoter who's holding out his own interests, putting his fighter against whoever he can to make money with. I understand that. But in those days, Top Rank did the best fighters. We had another promoter at the time, Don King, was mainly doing heavyweights, and Julio Cesar Chavez was his smaller weight guy. Mike Tyson and all the other heavyweights, Larry Holmes. We had the weight classes below heavyweights. So we had the light heavies, the middles, the welters, the lightweight. We had all those that we were interested in. King wasn't interested in. We stayed in our own lanes. But now Leonard would have a promoter, Hearns would have a promoter, Duran would have a promoter, and Hagler would have a promoter. And you couldn't make those matches anymore.
That's sad. It's sad to hear, because if you just look in the lightweight division now, the amount of fights that could be made when you look at the guys like whether it's Loma, Lopez, Haney, Ryan Garcia, Tank Davis. It's a loaded division of a plethora of fights, and all these guys are available. And they have succeeded, except for Loma and Lopez. All of them have succeeded in not fighting each other.
Well, we promote Teofimo Lopez and Lomachenko, and they'll fight anybody in the world. I can safely say that without any fear of criticism or rebuke. However, Ryan Garcia has a promoter. It's that promoter's best interest to keep Garcia to themselves. Haney's promoter, which is himself, and PBC, they want to keep them to themselves. Tank Davis has his promoter. Our guys will fight anybody. Their guys won't. So there's the problem. Or Josh Taylor will fight anybody. He unified at 140. He's willing to move up and challenge Terrence Crawford, who I think is the best welterweight in the world. But top-ranked guys will fight, and other promoters, shelter and protect their fighters, and they hurt the game that way.
So, Bruce, your thoughts then after Taylor becomes undisputed, wins all 4 belts. Your thoughts on Tank Davis making a claim now to the 140-pound title as of his win last weekend, which was an impressive win. He looked good in doing it, but making a claim to a title that didn't somebody just win that 2 weeks sooner?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a boxing fan. I like to watch Tank Davis, and I like to watch Devin Haney. But don't go around saying you've got a title when you really don't. I mean, those are manufactured belts that you want to be the 40-pound champ, fight Josh Taylor. Jose Ramirez didn't hurt him that he got outpointed. You want to fight the lightweight Teofimo, he'll fight you. Just say the word. These are easy fights to make, but the fighters are hiding behind their promoters, and the promoters are protecting their investment in those kids. So, what can I tell you? That's the way it is.
And TV played a great role in that as well, in becoming, before they were a platform for airing this, have they become part of the, I don't want to say the problem, but basically the problem of saying, no, these fighters are exclusively to us, so we don't want these fights against other guys. I mean, I've seen telecasts without naming names where they refuse to mention fighters that belong to another promotional company or to another network, as if they don't exist in the division.
Yeah, well, Showtime does that.
You say that.
Why, am I wrong?
No, not at all.
Oh, okay. I thought I might have made a mistake. No, Showtime wouldn't mention Terrence Crawford among the top welterweights in the world. They'll mention the PBC fighters. Okay, that's their decision. They don't claim to be journalistically fair or accurate or unbiased. They put that up there, and the people who watch Showtime might believe it. They might not believe it. Everyone knows Crawford's the best. Spence might be almost as good. They should fight if they want to, but they don't have to, because boxing's still beneficial to television networks and vice versa. You need TV if you're going to be a promotional force. We're with ESPN. DAZN certainly has fighters with Eddie Hearn. They do a great job, and Showtime does what they do under Steven Espinosa and PBC. So everyone's got their own niche, and the fans have to decide who's for real, who can fight, who's hiding from the real champions.
And Bruce, because you mentioned Terrence Crawford, and everybody would love to see the Crawford-Spence fight. Spence has Pacquiao in August. That if that fight does indeed go through, it's an entertaining fight, an exciting fight on paper. Do you think Terrence Crawford, how confident are you that he'll be able to get one of those big names at 147 to fight? Or maybe is Josh Taylor an option of a fight that you guys would consider doing?
Well, the big names are not going to fight Terrence Crawford. I'm sure we're speaking about the same fighters. Manny Pacquiao came along. That was a blessing for Spence. Spence took that opportunity to fight a 42-year-old guy who hasn't fought in 2 years, rather than to fight Terrence Crawford. I don't blame him. If I managed Spence, I wouldn't fight Crawford either. But he's fighting him. People are going to tune in to watch it. I'm going to tune in to watch it. And so Crawford is going to end up having to fight not the best, not because he wouldn't fight the best. He certainly would. But most of the top fighters in his weight class are with another promoter. who doesn't seem interested in doing it. Now, we've worked with that promoter before. We did Fury Wilder with them. Yep. We've done other fights. It's not impossible, but the fighter has to want to do it too. If a fighter says to his promoter, I want to fight so-and-so, make it happen, the promoter's going to do it.
Bruce, why would you say that if you were Errol Spence's manager, you would avoid the Crawford fight as well? Isn't that the ultimate goal, to get your fighter a piece of the world title and hopefully a unification, because that arguably makes it your biggest payday? Like, that's the whole idea of getting your fighter the biggest payday. Would it not be beneficial to, in fact, take this fight instead of fight somebody else that could be high risk but low reward? No,
you can take fights that are less risk, less money, but you fight a few of those and you make the money. If you're looking for one big payday and you lose the fight, or you don't believe you can win the fight, you pass on it. It's all risk reward. And let's face it, Errol Spence doesn't have to fight Terrence Crawford. It's not about legacy. It's not about what's good for the fans or the sport. Each guy has a career that's being mapped out and plotted by people that Errol Spence or any other fighter pays to direct traffic in their career. So if Spence's people feel it's not his best interest to fight Terrence Crawford, they go another route, maybe an easier route, maybe a more lucrative route. It's all, do you want to fight or not?
Russ, we have only a few more minutes here with Bruce, and it feels like hopefully we can have Bruce on at another time, because we could probably talk for hours and hours. There's no shortage. I know one question, Bruce, I had, because of the fact you dealt in some point in your professional careers, Floyd Mayweather, De La Hoya, you've known these fighters. They're Hall of Fame fighters. They were legacy fighters. When they fought each other, it was one of the biggest fights, of course, in pay-per-view history. Now both Mayweather fought the exhibition against Logan Paul a few months ago. De La Hoya is considering coming back for an exhibition as well in the fall. Do you believe, in your experience in boxing, that these type of exhibitions hurt their legacy, or are you all for it, for them to make more money and continue doing something that's other than actual fights?
Well, you talk in the case of Oscar and Floyd, who are both tremendous fighters in their prime. If they can make a few bucks now based on fans paying to see them again in an exhibition, why not? Who am I to say? They were really, truly wonderful fighters. And they're both retired. They're both past their prime. So why not pick up a few bucks? If fans don't sign up and pay for it, then it didn't work. But no, I have no problem with that. We enjoyed them when they were in their primes, and if you watched Mike Tyson and Roy Jones in the first of these recent exhibitions, it was kind of exciting to see Mike back in action. Roy did the best he could, and two big names. It was good.
I was asked often about that thing of what I thought of it. Oh, these two guys at that age fighting each other. And I said, this is an opportunity for people to see these guys and kind of applaud and say thank you for the thrills and excitement that you brought us in your prime. I thought that was well-intentioned and really honorable, that these guys at their age would still want to do this, knowing they're not going to have done what they did when they were 25 and 28 years old, obviously. But then when we fast forward ahead to people who aren't even boxers, who have emerged in this social media star, but like you said, people are paying for it. So you can't, how can you knock that? If someone will pay you to watch you do this broadcast, do something, you're going to do it. You're going to do it because they're paying for it.
Sure. It's just like any program on television. HBO might be showing one movie, Showtime might be showing a movie, Netflix might. You pick what you want to watch and you watch it, and who's to say why, there's no accounting for taste. Everyone watches what they like to watch. And if you'd rather watch Logan Paul against Floyd Mayweather, why shouldn't you? Why wouldn't you?
Matt, before we let Bruce go, I want to ask him a question that's off boxing, if I may, but I want his opinion on this because you and I believe, were talking about this the other day. I should have brought it over before we got on air, but Bruce gave me, unless I can get up and get it, if I can get off camera.
Go ahead. We got some time, but you're not going to be able to talk at the same time.
No, okay. Well, then I'll let you ask a question, and then I'll come back with that. How's that? Okay.
All right. So, Bruce, then as we wait for Russ to get back, I just want to ask you then your thoughts on, let's say Fury defeats Deontay Wilder. He's the favorite to do so. Your confidence level out of maybe 1 to 10, or however you want to scale it, of a Fury Joshua fight happening at some point in their careers.
I think it will happen. I think it should happen. But Joshua's going to defeat Usyk, and Usyk can fight. He's a smaller guy, but he's a very skilled, talented guy, and it's a fight for Joshua. I hope he wins. I hope Fury wins, and I hope it'd be an unbelievable atmosphere in England or wherever they fight, Joshua and Fury. But anything can go wrong on the way to, to the ultimate goal. Things happen. That's boxing, but that's certainly would be a dream matchup.
100%. Russ, I think Bruce can still see us. We can't see Bruce anymore, but we got one final question, so we can hear you, Bruce. That's fine. Go ahead, Russ.
So Bruce gave me this, and tell me what you can see here. Bruce gave me this in his office. It commemorates Denny McClain's 30-win season, and Bruce is a massive baseball fan. And Matthew, I was telling you about this the other day. And Bruce, one of the things, and this is totally off boxing in a way, but it has a lot to do with it because this has been, we've seen this infiltration in boxing as well. How is it that with all the science, with all the conditioning, with all the strength training that people do in every sport, you had a guy like Denny McClain in 1968 who won 30 games and pitched a total of what did he pitch? He pitched a total
over 300 innings, I'll bet, right? Over 300 innings.
Yeah, like 20-something complete games.
And pitched 28 complete games. And yet, with all the science we have today, with all the technology we have today, fighters don't make weight. Fighters get tired. Baseball players can't pitch complete games. They have a pitch count and they're pulled out. Yet they're bigger than Denny McClain ever was. So why?
Why do fighters think that 12 rounds is the championship limit? Why do ringside announcers say now we're in the championship rounds, 11 and 12?
Yeah.
When that used to be NABF or USBA distance, 15 was the championship rounds, and guys did it. Now they get tired in the 11th and 12th round. They didn't used to get tired after 15 rounds. Mancini or Chavez or Sean O'Grady, they all went 15 rounds and never took a deep breath. But you've got strength and conditioning coaches, allegedly. Ray Robinson didn't have that.
Neither
Joe Louis didn't have that. The great fighters trained harder and worked harder, hit the heavy bag longer, did more road work, and they were better condition than today. And the same with the baseball pitchers. Baseball pitchers today, it went from 9 innings, which you were expected to pitch, to a pitch count of roughly 100, 110, to now it's let's not go through the lineup more than twice. Third time around the 5th inning, we should pull the guy because the other side figures out what he throws. But it didn't bother Nolan Ryan and Denny McClain and Dean Chance and Bob Gibson, Gaylord Perry. It didn't bother them to go the distance. 9 they were embarrassed. If they did, Dean Chance one year had 11 complete game shutouts in one season. Whole teams today don't have 11 shutouts in a season. So you tell me.
Well, listen, Bruce, it's been an absolute privilege. I hope we can do this at some other point. I know you got a lot of business to attend to now. There's always that's the beauty about boxing, right? There's never anything completely solidified. There's always some twists and turns. It's part of the job. And we definitely appreciate you being on the podcast this evening.
For the most part, until they get in the ring and the bell rings for the first round, you don't have a fight until then. But recently we've seen the bell ring and we still didn't have a fight.
I was going to say, you have that head clash in the first round. That could have put an end to the fight. It might not have been a fight. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I agree. Matthew, go ahead, Bruce.
No, I was going to say, Matt and Russ, I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your show. You have a great podcast, and we all appreciate what you and other people do for our sport.
Well, as good as this was, Bruce, I have to tell you, Matthew hasn't been privy to it, so for him this was good. But as good as this was, it's not good as breakfast at Black Bear Diner.
You got it. We'll do it again.
Russ, just hang around. We'll say bye to Bruce, but we got to talk for a few minutes here to close the podcast. Okay. So as we say goodbye to Bruce, and it was definitely an honor and a privilege to have Bruce on. And Russ, I just want to get to the fights this weekend. Just your prediction real quick, because of course, if those of you who are interested in placing a little wager over the weekend, you can do so with
Bet99, and you use the promo code BOXING99. Correct?
I'm actually very good at this, so I'm
very good. And listen, I'm going to tell you, if you make a bet, and this is Frank's best part, right? Frank knows I'm getting good at this, right? If you make a bet and you win, Bet99 will match your bet up to $600. You could double your money up to $600 if your bet comes in.
Yeah,
what a deal. I'm not even a gambling man, and I know that's a good deal.
It's a very good deal. So it's Canada's newest online sports book and casino, bet99.com. Be sure to check out the player props, their bet builders, their risk-free live bet bonuses, and the code BOXING99. It's the sports welcome offer. So it's a deposit match of 100% up to $600. There's some big boxing matches over the weekend. There's, of course, as well, a Conor McGregor pay-per-view in the UFC, a trilogy bout against Dustin Poirier. So we have about 5 minutes left, Russ. I just want to get your thoughts on the return of Zurdo Ramirez at 175 against Sullivan Barrera. That's Friday night on the Zone. And we also have Joe Diaz at 135 fighting Javier Fortuna. Anything jump out at you in the light heavyweight division? Can Zurdo Ramirez, you think, be a player if he defeats a tough and rugged veteran in Sullivan Barrera?
You know what? That's where matchmaking, we probably should have questioned Bruce on this but that's where matchmaking comes into play. Making the right fight just right at the timing of making the right fight against a named guy who's been a fixture in the division, but you think he just might be not quite what he was, and your star is moving up to that division. But before you think about getting one of the belts, you got to prove that you belong in the light heavyweight division. That's so you take on a perennial contender like Sullivan Barrera, who in his own right and at his best was a solid 175-pounder that's going to give you nightmares. He wasn't a guaranteed win for anybody. And if your guy passes that test, then you move on to bigger and better things. And if he doesn't, you know that's where it went. So that's why matchmaking is so important. And I think this is the right timing for Zurdo to get by somebody like Sullivan Barrera. If Sullivan Barrera can't deal with the intensity and the pressure and the volume that somebody like Zurdo Ramirez puts on him, it's going to be a long night. And Zurdo Ramirez establishes himself as a potential challenger to a light heavyweight title. Although in this day and age, with the light heavyweight division as strong as it is, there's no easy road to a light heavyweight title. I'll tell you that right now. But
what about Bertabayev, the guy, of course, you work with? It's not looking like it's a done deal anymore that Joe Smith is going to be the guy next. Potentially could be somebody else. So look, I think Bertabayev probably still waiting for a big fight. But if you look at anybody in the light heavyweight division, it looks like it's Bertabayev and Bivol who are head and shoulders above everyone else on paper. And what we've seen of late, I think that by far and away, those are the two guys people want to see.
You're right. They would be. But that doesn't mean that Joe Smith is not a nightmare for anybody he fights, unless you are absolute blue chip, unless you are the Bivol or maybe the better Biev, or, unless you're, or a Canelo, unless you are blue chip. Joe Smith is a nightmare. He's a nightmare to fight. He's big, he's strong, he's old school, he trains hard, he comes to fight. Whatever he lacks in finesse and savvy and skill, he more than makes up for in dogged determination, in pressure, in volume of punching, in desire, in heart, in toughness. He makes up for it in all those compartments that take away from what he might be missing in the finesse department. So you better be ready to fight if you're fighting Joe Smith. And I hope we see him back in action. He won a title, which was his dream to win. And I know they're letting him enjoy it a little bit now, but I hope we see him back in action soon. And for himself as well, even if you try to give Joe, what they call a soft touch, you try to give him an easy pass on a fight, he's still in a fight. He's always in a fight.
Well, the rumors were maybe Danny Jacobs moving up to light heavyweight. It's an intriguing East Coast fight for both men. And I think in the case of, Danny Jacobs is a tough fighter, but doesn't necessarily bring the same type of power that Alberto Bayev does. We'll see what happens. In 2 minutes or less, Fortuna, Jojo Diaz, 2 southpaws at 135. And when you're talking about that deep lightweight division, I think the winner of this fight is a player for all the big names that people are going to want to see. And I think it is going to be a lot of offensive action in that fight at some point. I think you're going to see a lot of leather being thrown.
Are they fighting at 30 or 35?
I believe it's it's the interim lightweight title, another WBC interim lightweight title. So that means now you're going to have Lopez, Haney, and the winner of this fight have some sort of claim at the WBC belts.
Okay, we won't get into that, like how that's even humanly possible.
Yeah, Diaz has moved up to 135.
It's a 135. So we forgot to name them in the list when I said how talent-laden the division is. You can add those 2 guys, because I'll tell you what, I had a chance of knowing and meeting and training side by side of Fortuna when he was starting out in the pro game. And when I looked at him, I said, oh, this guy can punch. This guy's got something, and he has proven to be right. He has proven to be a solid fighter. Samson finds these guys, and they have success. I love him as a fighter, and this cannot help but be an action-packed war.
Yeah, I think so.
When I tell you, forget it. This is going to be a war, and if Jojo Diaz, who I know is intense in his own right, can withstand the power of Fortuna, boy, it's going to be some slugfest. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I think for sure the winner will probably be in position maybe for Devin Haney, if you would think it makes sense. So you have Lopez, franchise champion, Haney regular, and now WBC is going to have an interim champion with the winner of Jojo Diaz, Javier Fortuna. So they said WBA, hey, you guys have a good idea. We'll add some belts as well, right?
Yeah. Well, we should have asked Bruce about that. That's just, again, it's craziness that happens. But again, it wouldn't be able to happen if the fighters weren't paying the sanction fee, if the promoters weren't paying the sanction fee, if they just did a regular, the winner fights for, like that's how it used to be. They'd make fight posters. 2 guys are fighting, say the winner's next shot is for the title. That's how they build the event. Yeah. That's how it was built. The winner gets a shot at the title. That's all it took. But now you have to make a belt for that, and they wear it. They wear it. They put it on. But it's not a world title, it means you're the number 1 contender. It means you're the next mandatory. They wear it and they hug it and they put it in the air and someone carries it in, out of the ring. Like that's, I think, what bothers me more than anything.
And we'll be able to test your theory of last week when you had the rant about the belts, that if they announce the winner, they won't say the word interim very loud. They'll say WBC champion a lot louder inside the ring. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. I thought it was a lot of fun again this evening. We'll have some more information, some more guests on, of course, in the weeks to come. Monsieur Anber, always a pleasure. And listen, we were able to do it under an hour as a target, getting a bit better with our estimated time of arrivals here.
And Bruce's battery didn't die on his phone.
No, that was the big, hey, listen, it wasn't so bad. I think Bruce was better technologically than Scully was. So I got to tell Scully he's being defeated technologically wise by Mr. Bruce Trampler.
You're setting the bar really low if you're comparing him to Scully. I mean, come on.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, listen, Russ, take care. Have a great weekend, everyone. Enjoy the fights, and we'll talk soon.
All right, brother.